Hey, my name's Elliott. I'd like to welcome you back to our afternoon sessions for the Hero's Journey Entrepreneurship Festival. Thanks to all the morning panelists for such a wonderful time. We're going to kick it off with a fun panel here, and throughout organizing this whole event, I felt a bit like Tom Sawyer painting the fence, because this was going to be my panel, and people email, and I got a great email from Cyril Morong, who's an economist, and he's saying, you know, I've been writing all these papers, doing this research, ever since I went to an IHS seminar back in 91, 92, was it? 89. Back in 89, and so he got interested in the whole aspect of basically the hero, the entrepreneur as the lone hero, the creative destroyer from Joseph Schumpeter. And we have the quote up here, the stock exchange is a poor substitute for the Holy Grail, which is definitely a good way to teach and inspire entrepreneurship, that you're not working for the bottom line as opposed to the higher ideals. Anyways, so he kind of did half my job in kind of giving a much more intellectual backbone to the site from an economic standpoint, because his paper, which he'll talk about a little bit, actually goes in depth and sums up. He's done a lot of research on all different economists, their views on what the entrepreneur is. And that's actually a place that's lacking in the whole field of economics, is the study of entrepreneurship, which is kind of odd because entrepreneurship is the fount of so much of the wealth that economists do end up studying. But there's various reasons for that. He'll comment on them. And then there's a book for sale outside. And we have one of the authors here. We're quite honored, Carol S. Sampson. And the back of the book says, it's about the spirit, it's called The Spirit of Entrepreneurship. And the back of it says, personal stories of 60 entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial executives from Europe and North America are studied in the context of human and organizational behavior. So that whole word story keeps showing up again and again. Case studies range from solo entrepreneurs to fast-growing ventures, and from entrepreneurial CEOs to creative leaders in the public sector. So again, it's that whole thing that entrepreneurship spans a full spectrum, and that so often it is not looking at it as like one just unique type of person that does it.
Okay, can you hear me okay? I don't talk into a microphone a lot. I teach small classes, about 25 to 30 students, and we're a much smaller room. As Elliott said, I'm an economist. I have a PhD in economics. I'm probably the only economics professor in the room, right? Economics is called the dismal science, so everyone's been so upbeat and optimistic today. I think we need a dose of being dismal. So someone's got to come in here and put a damper on things, or we'll kind of fly off the handle. An article I wrote, Nicole is going to pass it out. It's an article that kind of summarizes what I'm going to be talking about. It's one I wrote in 1992. I call my little talk here today, Who Says Entrepreneurs Are Heroes? Well, it turns out a lot of people are saying it, and a lot of people who really know what they're talking about are saying it. So I'm going to try to briefly do three things. Talk about how I got interested in this, Elliott alluded to it, and then go over briefly my major findings, and then just go through one by one. Who are some of these other people that are coming up with this idea of saying that entrepreneurs are heroes? Well, whoops. We had a panel this morning made up of people from the Institute for Humane Studies, and in 1989 I attended a seminar that they put on, and one of the required readings was by an economist named Israel Kirzner. And in one of his books he said something like, entrepreneurs discover opportunities for economic profit by leading lives of purposeful action. Okay, well, as a graduate student in economics, they never really taught us about what purposeful action might be. And that sounded like following your bliss, because the Power of Myth series with Bill Moyers and Joseph Campbell had been on just the previous year. Well, over the next few years, I developed the idea. I wrote this short article that's going around, and I wrote a longer paper, which is on my website, called The Creative Destroyers. Maybe you'll understand why I called it that in a little bit. Okay, so let's see. I'm ready to do my PowerPoint. So, oh, you're on. I'm on. Okay. Okay, so this gets into my first point. I'm going to talk about three similarities between entrepreneurs and heroes. I guess I'll call those my major findings. And I've already mentioned what Kirzner said, and I've got some quotes there from Joseph Campbell that summarizes following your bliss. He talked about following your bliss a lot, so there, it's not just any one quote from Campbell. He said, if the work you're doing is the work if the work you're doing is the work that you choose to do because you are enjoying it, that's it. Each incarnation has a potentiality, and the mission of life is to live that potentiality. That's the kind of thing that made me think that Kerzner was saying the same thing, but about entrepreneurs. Okay, now the next slide is a quote from the book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. So this gets into my second parallel between entrepreneurs and heroes. Oops, okay. And like I said, this is from the Hero with a Thousand Faces. The standard path of the mythological adventure of the hero is a magnification of the formula represented in the rites of passage, separation, initiation, return, which might be named the nuclear unit of the monomyth. A hero ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are there encountered, and a decisive victory is won. The hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man. Well, how does this work for the entrepreneur? And this is a little bit of a clip from the article that you have. The entrepreneur must step out of the ordinary way of producing and into his or her imagination about the way things could be to discover the previously undreamt of technique or product. The fabulous forces might be applying the assembly line technique or interchangeable parts to producing automobiles or building microcomputers in a garage. The mysterious adventure is the time spent tinkering in research and development, but once those techniques are discovered or developed, the entrepreneur now has the power to bestow this boon on the rest of mankind. So that's a second similarity. Following your bliss is one similarity between the entrepreneur and the hero. This going through this separation, initiation, return is a second similarity. Entrepreneurs have to separate themselves from their normal world and go discover some better way to do things and then come back, bring it back to the marketplace. Third similarity, when I read The Hero with a Thousand Faces for the second time, I actually noticed this. Joseph Schumpeter, the famous economist that Elliott mentioned in his book, Capitalism, Socialism, and Democracy, talked about the incessant creative destruction in a capitalist economy to describe what entrepreneurs do. Well, now I'm reading The Hero with a Thousand Faces again, and I see that Campbell refers to something called the cosmogonic cycle, which unrolls the great vision of the creation and destruction of the world, which is vouchsafed as revelation to the successful hero. For example, Henry Ford destroys the horse and buggy age, but creates the automobile age. So that really amazed me. That was probably the most amazing thing I came across in studying these comparisons. The Hero with a Thousand Faces and Schumpeter's book, they both came out in the 1940s, and I'm not sure if anyone ever saw that similarity before, although people certainly for a long time have talked about the entrepreneur as hero. Well, now who else says that entrepreneurs are heroes? Okay. A little behind in my slide. The first people that we're going to look at are Candace Allen Smith and Dwight Lee. Candace Allen Smith has won numerous teaching awards, and she's been a high school teacher. And someone mentioned Vernon Smith earlier, Nobel Prize winner in economics at George Mason University. She's married to Vernon Smith, and she works with him at their Institute for Experimental Economics. And then she co-authored an article with Dwight Lee, and he's a professor of private enterprise at the University of Georgia. He's a very well-known economist, has published many articles and books. And they wrote an article in 1996 called The Entrepreneur's Hero, which won the Best Paper Award. And just to try to summarize what I thought was maybe the main point of their article, in my opinion, they said just as the society that doesn't venerate winners of races will produce fewer champion runners than the society that does, the society that does not honor entrepreneurial accomplishment will find fewer people of ability engaged in wealth creation than the society that does. And then Candace Allen was invited to give a speech on this at the Federal Reserve Bank in Dallas. And this is what economics is all about, the Federal Reserve Board. And they wanted to hear this message of entrepreneurs being heroes. And in that speech, she used the separation, initiation, return from Campbell to describe what the hero does. And then her article, her speech was published by the Fed in their Insights newsletter, and then the Independent Review and the Freeman, those two other publications reprinted that. Then we moved to 2001, Narayana N.R. Murthy, who's the chairman and CEO of Infosys, he gave the commencement address in 2001 at Wharton to the MBA graduates. And well, what did he tell them? What was the last thing he told them? What do you want to guess? Oh, come on. Follow your bliss. Wow, you guys are clairvoyant. He talked, this is the last paragraph from his speech. He talked about Bill Moyers and the Power of Myth series with Joseph Campbell. And the very last thing he says, but always without fail ensure that you are following your bliss. This is a successful entrepreneur giving advice to future entrepreneurs. The next person is James Kouzes, who's the author of The Leadership Challenge, How to Get Extraordinary Things Done in Organizations. He has served as director of the Executive Development Center of the University of Santa Clara. He's also an executive fellow, Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship, Levy School of Business. Now, I'm going to have a quote from him, and it was from a television show called Thinking Aloud with Jeffrey Mishlove. Has anyone ever seen that show? Excellent show. I think he had Joseph Campbell on it one time. And he talks about what he's done working with entrepreneurs, that Campbell's idea of a vision quest really describes what the entrepreneurs do. And at the end of the quote, he says, I think there's a perfect connection between what Campbell was saying about mythology and what we and others are discovering about leadership. And of course, earlier he says that the entrepreneur is one of the new heroes in the world, one of the new mythical heroes. This is clearly somebody that knows what he's talking about because he works with entrepreneurs. I don't know the date of when he was interviewed by Jeffrey Mishlove. The next person is Jerry Osteryoung, Executive Director of the Jim Moran Institute for Global Entrepreneurship. He's a professor of finance, a professor of entrepreneurship. He's worked with over 3,000 entrepreneurs. He's written a column for entrepreneurs in the newspaper. And what did he say? On his blog page, he wrote a blog entry a couple years ago, not quite 2 years ago, which is called Follow Your Bliss. Okay? And he goes on and talks about how you're not going to be successful if you are in it for the money, but you have to follow your passion. Okay, so again, everybody I'm talking about so far, these are not people that are just, dabbling in this. These people really know what they're talking about. They have good academic backgrounds, serious scholars. Then Walter Williams, who's a professor at George Mason University, that came up earlier today, and he gave a speech at Hillsdale College called The Entrepreneur's American Hero. And he said, to me the most telling thing he said was, for the most part in a free society, people who are wealthy have become so through effectively serving their fellow man. That is the only way to make a profit. Okay, he didn't get into Joseph Campbell or mythology, but he did say that what entrepreneurs do is pretty much the most important thing. Then we have Johan Norberg, and he's written several books, Defense of Global Capitalism, which has won numerous awards recently, and he got invited to give a speech at Cato. So what did he talk about? Well, his talk was about the entrepreneur as hero, and who did he quote? Joseph Campbell. Okay, so here's someone who clearly knows a lot about economics and what goes on in the economy today, and bottom line for him was that entrepreneurs are heroes in the Joseph Campbell sense. Then Kenneth Kukier, he is a technology correspondent, and there was something called the Rushlikan Conference on Information Policy, and they decided to title their report Innovative Entrepreneurship and Public Policy, and they named it after the hero with 1,000 faces. Now, they begin with a quote from Joseph Campbell, where you stumble, there your treasure lies. And then in one part of the report it says, tacit knowledge is communicated, one way tacit knowledge is communicated is through narrative and myth. So again, they're getting back to stories and myth, everything that we've been talking about here today. The timeless lessons of literature and art. And then it goes on and mentions that, well, what were they going to do about it? Well, they were going to hire a storyteller. A journalist is a professional storyteller, and they made a point to name this book after Joseph Campbell's book. And then James Currier, who founded the internet company Tickle, he was quoted in the San Francisco Chronicle saying about starting a business as an adventure, it can build your character as you build the business in that Joseph Campbell, the hero with 1,000 faces kind of way. And then last October, getting finally back to an economist, somebody who might know what he's talking about, he's a Nobel Prize winner, maybe you've heard of Edmund Phelps. This was his article. This was his article called Dynamic Capitalism, written right after the announcement that he won the Nobel Prize. And I know how Elliott McGuckin likes the classics and Aristotle. Well, he quoted Aristotle. He said, using what he called an Aristotelian perspective on the development of talents, Rawlsian justice requires that entrepreneurs be accorded enough opportunity to raise their self-realization scores. And then he also said it would be a non sequitur to give up on private entrepreneurs and financiers as the wellspring of dynamism merely because the fruits of their dynamism would likely be less than they could be in a less imperfect system. I conclude that capitalism is justified normally by the expectable benefits to the lowest paid workers, but failing that by the injustice of depriving entrepreneurial types, as well as other creative people, of opportunities for their self-expression. I don't think that's a big leap to say self-expression, self-realization. That's very similar to what Campbell is talking about in terms of following your bliss. And again, this is a Nobel Prize-winning economist, okay, and he's talking about it in the context of entrepreneurship. Now, there's one more expert to hear from. We're going to listen to a short clip from a radio interview he did, and someone is interviewing him. And you may have heard of this author as we listen to it, but this person also has something to say, so I think you might want to listen to that.
In a sense, it's the going for the jumping over the edge and moving into the adventure that really catalyzes the creativity, isn't it?
I would say so. You don't have creativity otherwise.
Otherwise, there's no fire. You're just following somebody else's rules.
Well, my wife is a dancer, you know, and she has had dance companies for many, many years. And I don't know whether I should talk about this, but when the young people are really adventuring it, it's amazing what guts they have and what meager lives they can be living, you know, and yet the richness of the action in the studio. Then you're going to have a concert season. They all have to join a union. And as soon as they join the union, their character changes. There are certain rules of how many hours a day you can rehearse. There are certain rules of how many weeks of rehearsing. They bring this down like a sledgehammer on the whole thing. And there are two mentalities. There's the mentality of security, of money, and there's the mentality of the open risk, you know.
In other societies, we can look and see that there are other societies, cultures that honor elders. In our society, it seems like the elders are part of the mainstream, and there's a continual kind of wanting to turn away from what the elders have to say, the way it is, the way to do it. And the union example is a typical one where the authority institution, namely the union, comes in and says, this is the way it's done. And then one has to fall into line, or one has to find something else to do.
That's right.
And it's like created this dichotomy between the elders and the sons and daughters of the elders. And how do you see that in relationship to other cultures?
Well, this business of what this comes to is the conflict of the art, creative art, and economic security. And I don't think I've seen it in other cultures. The artist doesn't have to buck against quite the odds that he has to buck against today.
The artist is honored in other cultures.
He is honored.
Yes.
And quickly honored. Here...
it's a struggle, there are non-profit
a long
organizations,
time, yeah.
and the whole route of the struggle.
Or you might just hit it off, something that really strikes the need and requirements of the day, and then you've given your gift early, you know. But basically, it's a real risk. And I think that's so in any adventure. Even in business, the man who has the idea of a new kind of gift to society, you know, and he's willing to risk it. And then the workers come in and claim that they're the ones that did it, you know, and he can't afford even to perform his performance. It's a grotesque conflict, I think, between the security and the creativity ideas. The entrepreneur is a creator. He's running a risk.
Maybe in American capitalistic society, the entrepreneur is the creative hero in some sense.
Oh, I think he is. I mean, the real one. Most people go into economic activities not for risk, but for security. Do you see what I mean? And the other psychology tends to take over.
I'm speaking with Joseph Campbell. We're going to continue our...
How many people recognize Campbell? Some of you did? Okay. Well, if you didn't recognize the voice, that was, first of all, Michael Toms, who has a radio show called New Dimensions at KQED in San Francisco, the radio station. And of course, that's Joseph Campbell. People have been talking about him all day long, the author of The Hero with a Thousand Faces. If you don't know, he died in 1987. I don't have an exact date for this tape. It must have been between 1972 or 3 and 1987. Some of the tapes are still available through New Dimensions. I have several tapes, several hours worth of conversations between Campbell and Toms, and I think this was the last one I listened to. I'd been through all of them, and I remember I was driving on the road in rural Arkansas, and I had the tape playing in my car. I'd already been doing the entrepreneurship research for a couple of years, and I had no idea Joseph Campbell had ever talked about this. One last thing, I have a website that I call The Relationship Between Economics and Mythology. If you come across any books or articles that relate economics to mythology, send me an email, and I can post a link to that, because I'm trying to get a central place where anybody can go and see what's being done in terms of relating economics to mythology. Thank you. I think it's a pretty long address because it's got my SBC Yahoo information in front of it.
It's linked off of Hero's Journey Entrepreneurship.
Yeah, okay. And you just type in economics and mythology into Google, you'll find it.
Thank you, Cyril. Cyril found me on the web. I just wanted to say a few things and then maybe have you join me in that. I had the enormous fortune of meeting talking to Elliott Campbell. It must have been in the 80s or early 70s, shortly before he died. At the Ashton Institute. Can hear you back. Oh, sorry. I don't like to stand behind there, so I'm going to do it like this. It's another barrier that we don't need. Is that better? So I had the enormous fortune to meet him, even better, technology. Is it on? It's not on. Does it work? Well, oh. Okay. Oh. Well, so that was the story about Joseph Campbell, very impressive person. I want to talk a little bit, not so much about Joseph Campbell, or I want to do it through the stories, my own story partially, and stories of other people. And quickly, you know, I came to this happy land about 40 years ago, and lived all over the world, and spent half my career as an executive and as an entrepreneur in the biomedical realm, and wrote a book about that called Scientists as Entrepreneurs, in which I quoted Joseph Campbell. And that's probably how you found me, or maybe the other book. And then I decided that that wasn't my bliss anymore. It was just too automatic for me, and so I became, after the entrepreneurship thing, I became an academic. And I've done this now since 1990. And I'm at the point now where I told one of my academic colleagues here today, where I have put myself into 100% variable professorship. So I only work when I make money, and I only make money when I work. So I have no, well, I do have tenure, they can't fire me, but if I want to work 5%, I can do that, and if I want to work 100%, I do that. So what I now do is I visit mostly other universities and talk about stuff that Elliott invited me here for. So my book, my recent book, is about entrepreneurship, the spirit of entrepreneurship. These are 60 stories of people in North America and Europe who took this upon themselves to defy all the odds, and it's their stories. The other story of it has to do with the fact that community, economy, and ecology are drifting apart, as we hear every day. And my thesis is that these three entities are supreme grounds for entrepreneurship. That there's lots of opportunities in ecological entrepreneurship or in ecological economics on the very presumption that the first two words that I mentioned have the same three first letters. Who knows what eco means? Life? Well, boils down to it. Eco? It actually means earth. So eco is a Greek word, and one ecology therefore is the knowledge, the science of the world, of the earth, and economy is basically the management of the earth. When the two start to separate, what will happen? Or to put it more succinctly, when economy is going to exceed the physical limitations of Mother Earth, what is going to happen? Sorry? Yeah, but it's much more subtle than that. It can be much more. But in essence, what happens is we are polluting ourselves when that happens, or we're polluting our children, and I have grandchildren, so that doesn't feel too good either. So I'm not an eco-warrior in the ecological sense. I'm an economy warrior in that sense. And that's totally also, totally compatible with the whole issue of living your bliss. Because if you see the consequences of what happens, and then on the other hand you go on the web and look at sustainable business ventures, you'll find hundreds of companies that have sprung up in very recent times that make money there. One of them is from my alma mater, 2 students 2 years ago from the Wharton School in a logistics class of all places. They came with the idea that, wow, if we can offer consumers to buy their CO2 emissions voluntarily, then that's a business, because there's a lot of consciousness going around there. And so they started doing this, and the company is called Therapass.com. And in the shortest period of time, they were selling for $49. I have an old Volvo. $49 a year for my average driving will, in fact, take the CO2 emissions back into plantations that they build and alternative energy. So the thesis of my talk here today is that serving both the ecos is an extremely good entrepreneurial idea. It's an extremely good entrepreneurial idea. And you look for all your examples there. When Ben & Jerry's was bought by Unilever, Unilever is one of the companies that I do a lot of seminar work with. They're the largest food company one of the largest food companies in the world, and they're worrying. They're thinking forward, and they're saying, what are we going to do? We're serving 2 billion people. The other 4 billion, most of them don't have enough food. So they're saying, that's not possible, because, what is our role as a company in doing that? It's not about giving food away, but how can we create value chains that will also help us grow with that growing dilemma? So very sound, forward-thinking kind of things. When they bought Ben & Jerry's, Ben Cohen, who writes a recommendation on the back of my book, because he's a Vermonter like I am, although I was born in the Netherlands, I call myself a Vermonter. And Ben said, okay, we'll sell it to you, but under the condition that you have to absolutely adhere to our value statement, our mission statement. And you can't believe how happy Unilever is with this, because it gives them an excuse, a new business model. They build a factory just like that in Europe now, like the one in Vermont. They're doing the same thing. They're selling ice cream with messages on the cans and that sort of thing, and people adore them. And I tell this story not because I don't eat that much ice cream, but I tell this story because what you now get is a value chain that starts with all the ingredients of the earth. So they buy milk from farmers that would otherwise go under, from small farmers. They specify the milk has to come from these small farmers. Some of it is organic, some of it isn't. And they use very nifty advertising techniques. So they have built a value chain with which an enormous number of customers are tremendously happy. And so they're serving ecology and economy at the same time, just like the guys at TerraPass. And of course, as entrepreneurs and as humans, we always make mistakes. You know, some ventures will, you know, make a mistake, and then the press will roll over us and say, you know, you guys are just liars and cheaters, like business people are always called. Some of them are. You know, some doctors are liars and cheaters. Yeah. Some professors are, some humans are liars and cheaters. What I loved about Joseph Campbell was that that's what he was preoccupied with. He was not preoccupied with the bottom line. He reversed it. He said, if you follow your bliss, you get your bottom line. And that bottom line is not only made up of dollars or euros. I like euros these days, very strong against the dollar. Bring my savings over cash. I love that part. But bliss is made up of 3 types of values, or many more than that. And one of them is money, and we equate money to basically solving all our problems, you know. But if we don't solve this larger challenge, but I want to talk about opportunity of the 2 ecos drifting apart. If we don't solve that, then we have very little to hold on anymore. Because then we're going to end up in a situation where there will be just too much illness. I once wrote a little paper about 7, 8 years ago, which I published. It was called the opportunities in new venturing in a cost externalizing economy. What's a cost externalizing economy? Can anybody explain this to us? Are we living in a cost externalizing economy? Is pollution externalization? Yeah. So we're living in a situation wherein what we do is partially accounted for by profit loss statement and balance sheets and cash flows. And I should know this because I was a financial executive for decades. But there's a part that's not being accounted for. Where does that go? It ends up in the morning when I come out of my little cute cottage in Venice on the beach there, and I see these huge dust clouds coming over me. Who pays for that? There is a correlation now in the World Health Organization has a statistic which they started maybe 20 years ago. And for the first time in the history of man, we can correlate health with health of the planet. Isn't that amazing? So what you will see there is that hormonally related cancers are skyrocketing in countries with industrial pollution and not in the other countries. Women who migrate from Japan to San Francisco. Japan has a much lower rate of breast cancer than the US has. Within 5 years, they have the same mortality rate. So, you know, when I talk to executives, I usually start off by saying, I'm going to tell you that we're living in a crisis of perception, and then they're all quiet. You know, and then it's okay for a while, and then they say, he's another doomsdayer, and at the end of them, you know, they've seen the opportunities. But I didn't start that with you. What I would like to end on is by saying there is a tremendous opportunity in living your bliss, showing who you are to your clients, to your customers, to your family, and at the same time taking care of your income, i.e., you know, going after, as an entrepreneur, going after profit, planet, and people. And the way you do that is by building value chains where people will buy you not only because they like your price, because they also like your story. Joseph Campbell, live your bliss. So that's all I want to tell you. Oh, and talking about the money, that book is very expensive. I hope there's nobody that's here from Springer. But the book that we published with these 60 stories is is a very expensive book. They set the price. Maybe if you all go on strike, they will lower the price, you know. consumers, do this. But the other thing about the book was that it came to us that my research partner is both a psychologist and an economist. And she's very, very focused on the human behavioral aspects of what makes an entrepreneur an entrepreneur. So she and I work together well because I started 3-4 companies myself in my life. And so it's a very good book in that sense. But what we also did is we fashioned it in itself as an entrepreneurial venture. So this book was written by us with very little compensation. We did about 75% of it for free. And the royalties go to the foundation that supports our university. And that's a lovely entrepreneurial thing to do, as far as I'm concerned. The chancellor would like it if all his students wrote books and sent the royalties to the university, wouldn't you? Yeah. So that's actually my little story. So I'm trying to tell you a story rather than to tell you what to do with it. If you want some more information, just find me on the web, or look up the little book and see where you can find me. Thank you very much. I don't have a website. N-Y-E-N-R-O-D-E. Did you get that? N-Y-E-N-R Nijenrode.nl. You can find everything about me on there. That's where my professorship is.
Hi, I'm Vic Rubenfeld of the Big Picture weblog at bigpicweblog.com. I'm a Pajamas Media blogger. Pajamas Media is one of the bigger stories in the blogosphere in the past year or so. It's sort of like a drudge report of the blogosphere. It links every day some of the top blog stories going around all over the blogosphere and brings together a lot of very well-known commenters and bloggers who blog on the site directly as well. So Elliott asked me to speak today about blogging, blogosphere. So I'll say a few words about this. This is, of course, a key time in world history. And it takes all of us contributing all different points of view to figure out what's going on and what to do about it. It used to be that to make a substantial contribution, to be heard, you often had to be elected or appointed to some sort of a position of authority. And the blogosphere changes all that. Now anyone can be widely heard. Mainstream media, to this, even at this time, characterizes bloggers as, well, it tries to poo-poo bloggers. I'm going to read you 3 sentences from an AP story that ran this past week. Blogs are websites that tend to be narrow in focus and directed at a niche audience. Most operate without editors and give instant reaction to the news. Their freewheeling, open nature makes them popular, but also ripe for unverified statements. When I put something up on my site that has a remote implication that anyone can argue is not true, I hear about it from my commenters. There's a lot of editing in the blogosphere. And of course, mainstream media is well known for printing photos that are bogus. I'm sure you've all heard about the AP story, the bogus photos that had to be retracted by AP. Patorico.com, for example, identifies misstatements and omissions on the LA Times almost every day. So I'd say the strength of the blogosphere is precisely that it is free of the kind of editing that takes place in mainstream media. It's free of the restrictions of what you can and can't say within some massive institution like the LA Times. So I'll give you an example. And this is just a point of view I was able to express on my site this week. Some of us will agree with it, some of us will disagree with it. The point is, I got to say it. I'm just going to read you the last paragraph. I jumped off from a discussion of the movie 300, which I'm sure people will be talking about all day today. Many people are hailing that as an end of moral ambiguity because the heroes stand up for something that they believe in and they fight for it. And they say, this is good. This is a good thing, absolute moral good thing that we are fighting for. So I jumped off from that and I said, an end of moral ambiguity could have a massive impact on global geopolitics. To take one example, it's time for Israel to thrill the world by saying loud and clear that Israel stands for freedom, democracy, achievement, science, and equality of the sexes, and that those who do not recognize its right to exist have neither freedom, nor democracy, nor achievements, nor science, nor equality of the sexes. That alone would electrify and change the world. So it's very exciting to be able to say this. It's great that a lot of people, have all different points of view. But it's terrific to be able to make that contribution. It was linked by pajamas. As of this morning, 400 people had seen it. It's very thrilling to be able to make a statement and have it heard. So blogging gives us all a voice and a chance to be heard on key issues of the day, and all of us together do add up to something heroic. Would you like me to talk about the TV business at all? Is that enough? Thank you very much.
We have time for half a question. Or just a question and no answer. No, we have time for one question. If somebody wants to throw out a question. Yeah, go ahead.
So often entrepreneurs depend upon the creation of product consumption. Is Thorsten Veblen still relevant regarding this conspicuous consumption? Would Veblen approve of our brand of bottom line capitalism?
Okay, well, is this,
Yeah, he'll take it.
speaking as an economist, Veblen probably wouldn't. His famous book, The Theory of the Leisure Class. Incidentally, I know of at least 2 or 3 websites where the entire book is online, so if you wanted to read it. There was an interesting article in the Wall Street Journal about a week ago, and the author talked about conspicuous consumption and also conspicuous virtue, where companies are trying to sell goods, so when the person buys it, they can advertise that they're being virtuous. Like, you can buy a Prius and show that you care about the environment, even though maybe the cost that you save on gasoline doesn't justify the extra cost of the car. But no, I would say for sure what I know about. I think Veblen, like any other great economist of the past, is still relevant. Unfortunately, in most graduate programs, it's not required to take a history of economic thought class, and so it should be taught. And I guess I agree with that to a certain extent. He's still relevant, but I'm saying in new kinds of ways too.
Thanks so much. We have a 3 o'clock panel at 2 p.m. No, I'm just kidding. No, there is a 3 o'clock panel that's not listed in your program because they just skipped over the 3 o'clock hour. But we really do have a great 3 o'clock panel coming up. But let's hear it for our panelists up here. Our 3 o'clock panel is something that everybody wants to see. It's Christopher Vogler, who wrote The Writer's Journey, which was kind of a 7-page treatment that got famous because it's passed around Hollywood based on Joseph Campbell's Hero's Journey. He expanded in the 2nd edition of a book that's now required in my class, The Writer's Journey. He's going to be sitting with David Watley of Jonnicks, who's been running the video game company since 1987. They set several records for like the first 1 million hours that were paid for in a paid-for game. They're coming out with a new game called The Hero's Journey video game that actually has the Hero's engine that's been licensed by a lot of companies as they move forth into storytelling in the realm of video games. So having those two on a panel is quite a rare opportunity. It's great. Up next, we're privileged to have Skip Press and the Florist. And the fun thing about this was that Skip Press sent me a picture for his bio, and in the background were the Florists, because it was taken at a party hosted at Mike Warder's house. So Skip didn't realize that, so he kind of like nailed his whole panel. So then I sent out emails to all the panelists, could you please send me an email with pictures of everybody on your panel in one shot? Nobody else is able to do that. So the rescue from without doesn't always come through, but take your chances. But yeah, we'll reconvene in about 5 minutes or so. Also, we've got all of our contestants, I'm just kidding, all of our panelists are getting a free copy of John Bogle's Battle for the Soul of Capitalism and the Odyssey. But we have them for sale at a discount outside. They're both required reading from my class. So all the panelists, they get invited back next year if they do a book report. But we've got a great group up here. One of them, they have classes taught in over 1,000 universities syndicated and has written a lot. One was an airborne ranger in the Army, and one of them was a Miss America runner-up. But I forget which is which, because it all... in Miss Colorado, Skip Press. No, but we have the floor is in... Jonathan Flora is a veteran of the U.S. Army's 82nd Airborne Division, and he's also the writer-director of A Distant Thunder. And he's currently a producer at Disney, and he's worked with Miramax and a number of other production companies. Deborah, his wife, is actually the runner-up Miss America, Miss Colorado. And she's an actress, producer, director, and they're working together on a fascinating new vision for a company to produce movies, kind of to satisfy a demand for this that's totally in line with what we're talking about today, like the return to performing classical ideals in the contemporary context. So it's fun getting lunch with them and hearing all about it. And Skip Press has been a mentor and a friend. Skip, I remember meeting him in a cafe. It's so strange when you like think about where you meet everybody. Just hanging out in a cafe with a group of other people. But we've become friends since then. Skip, I had all of his books on my shelf before I knew who he was. But I all thought, because of his name, Skip Press, I thought the books were published by the press that was called Skip Press. And then I met him, and then I went home back to North Carolina a few times, and then it clicked one night. Wow, that's a person. That's the guy I met, Skip Press. So that all made sense. But Skip's books are great. He's got away with words. So check out all of his books on screenwriting, Hollywood, and philosophy of life, basically. Without any further ado, I'll let them take the show. Thanks so much, guys.
Okay, you guys are guinea pigs today. This is the first PowerPoint presentation I've ever done. Thank you. And if you want to throw something at me afterwards, just go ahead, because this might be a little controversial. Over the past 3 years, due to domestic intranquilities, I sort of did a lot of study about a lot of things that I'd abandoned while I was happily married and just being a Mr. Mom. And it sort of coalesced into a bunch of really interesting things that forwarded my knowledge of story and what I teach in these universities. And it's available in 1,200 universities. If I had students in each university, I wouldn't be able to sleep, but I don't. But I have a lot of students. And so I try to accommodate all cultures and all philosophies and religions and things, sort of with the same open mind that Joseph Campbell had when he began. And we should thank the Great Depression, because that's why Joseph Campbell went and spent 5 years studying all these things on money that he'd saved up, and came up with this stuff that began as an English class that he taught at Cyril Lawrence University in Bronxville, New York. And then one of his students one day said, "My dad's a publisher, you should write a book." And that's how we got A Hero with 1,000 Faces. So this is a culmination of what I've learned from a lot of great people that I've never met, including Joseph Campbell and some other people. So here's the first one. I try to teach universal wisdom, like I just said, where everything is drawn from. And the more that I study, the more that I learned that it's about flow. It's about the way things flow, the way things evolve in the world. And, you know, the Pepperdine's mascot is the waves. So I think that's kind of appropriate for today. And I discovered this element in my screenwriting course called I call it the shaping force. It shows up in the middle of Act 1. And the reason that I came up with this is because I was trying to write a romantic comedy using the Joseph Campbell matrix and looking for a mentor, and it just didn't work in the story. And so I started looking at other movies and movie heroes like Indiana Jones, Sam Spade, and I thought, these guys don't have a mentor. But in the middle of Act 1, you start to know what the story is about. And great stories reveal themselves early in the answer to this question: what is the story about? And if you're a screenwriter, or even if you're a novelist trying to sell a novel and you can't tell somebody what the story's about, you're going to have a tough time. And I've also found that great writers learn to answer that question in their own lives. Because our lives, every individual life in here is about something. And if you're lucky enough, you find out what it's about, and you'll probably find out that that is the bliss that you really should be following. You know, because, I mean, you can get in a little trouble that follow your bliss. You know, some people just like to sit around and smoke ganja. But that becomes what their life is about. It's not very blissful. You know, so when people come to me, they come to me from all over the place. I've got a book, The Complete Idiot's Guide to Screenwriting, is published in Russia, and I hear from people in Russia, Belarus, South America, Africa. I never know where I'm going to hear from people from, and I always ask them where are they with their career and where do they want to be, because a lot of people starting out writing don't think about a career. They're happy just to sell anything. But they should be thinking long term, and that has a lot to do with your success. And I've also found that you can solve your own life and the problems that you're having by what transformation takes place within the Joseph Campbell matrix and in the heroic stories. You know, I know people like to be humble and they don't like to think of themselves or talk about themselves. But really, at some point in your life, you'll have to be a hero to somebody, even if it's just to yourself. And the things that you learn will provide you, if you're paying attention, with a magic elixir. That's one of the things Campbell calls it, which you can share with others. Other people call it a boon. And that's really what life is about. The thing that people said earlier about, being of service to others is what great fortunes are all about. It's true. They come up with some boon, something that really helps others, and that's, even Bill Gates with Microsoft Word, has helped a lot of writers. And I ask people how they're doing. Groucho Marx used to see friends he hadn't seen for a long time, and he'd say, "Are you making money?" That was his first concern. Great artists are always concerned about other artists and how they're doing. They're not just self-absorbed. And when you know the basic truths and the basic techniques of what art you're doing, you can concentrate on the things that you want to do. Pablo Picasso could do perfect figure studies before he became Pablo Picasso. So you really do have to learn the basics of your art. And I have to learn the basics of this mouse, which I just messed up, but I don't know if a mouse is art. Let's see. Where is that thing? There it is. So, if you don't know the basics of storytelling, you want to be a creative writer, you want to be a filmmaker, something like that, you've got to learn them. And I find a lot of people want to shortcut it these days. It doesn't work. And then I find people that come to me and they say, they're just kind of lost. And I have to sort of talk with them sometimes to find out that they're lost. And you'll find that the great artists through the centuries didn't really always know what they were about. We know of William Shakespeare with 5 acts in his plays. Now, I don't know that he wrote plays with 5 acts. He wrote them based on when the people of the court wanted to take a break. Really, because a lot of these plays were performed at court. And Stephen King started out wanting to be Louis L'Amour. He wanted to be a Western writer, and look at him today. But everyone is unique, despite all these patterns that we talk about. And a lot of people don't want, don't end up realizing just how unique they are and what voice that they have, because people in Hollywood will always tell you they're looking for a unique voice. And somebody comes along and they learn a way to do certain things, and they become completely unique, like Charlie Kaufman. You know, my daughter helped me with this PowerPoint presentation. She's 14, and her favorite movie is Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, which I thought was brilliant, you know, by Charlie Kaufman. So whatever it is that you're trying to do, there are stories that only you can generate. Nobody else in this world can come up with these stories, and you know, if it speaks to enough of us, you will get somewhere. I've just seen it happen time and time again. That's Aristotle, and that's a picture of the parchment of Poetics, which is fabulous if you haven't read it. It's where a 3-act structure comes from, but he wasn't a playwright. He just observed. He was a teacher. So that's kind of interesting about the can't do teach argument that you hear. But he wasn't perfect because he was convinced that the solar system had the sun revolving around the earth. And I don't know if you can see it, but that's Aristotle's view of the universe. And outside Saturn, which was the last planet that he thought existed, there were fixed stars, and then there was a sphere of the prime mover, which I guess was God or whatever. You know, it's like these ideas evolve over time. I remember when I was a kid, Billy Graham, I watched the thing, and Billy Graham was convinced that he'd figured out, according to Scripture, that heaven was 753 miles above the earth. No, this is true. This is really true, you know. So where is this pattern that I'm talking about? What's it about? Well, it's all around us. It's really woven into life. It's coursing through your veins. It's not just story. There's a story that's going through your body right now. It's in the movement of light, and I'll get into that in a minute. How many of you people know what light really is? What it's physically composed of? Two people. Okay, I'll get to that in a minute. It's in the waves in the ocean. There are patterns. There are actual repeating patterns in the waves of the ocean that actually correlate with stories that you can see on screen. And it's also in great lives. Lives have these same patterns. The reason that the Joseph Campbell thing speaks to so many people is because he studied great lives. He studied great lives, religions, philosophies, and he found that there were repeating patterns. He didn't start out trying to match it with something. It's what he observed happen. And the great movies that Hollywood produces sometimes weren't really from Hollywood. A great number of them, increasingly so, I think, were developed sort of outside of the Hollywood think. And, you know, and that's the great thing. There's that uniqueness again. You know, some people that work at studios and with studios maintain their uniqueness and give us the stuff that moves our lives. And it's always been that way, frankly. It's not like just a new thing. So you start off with a singular idea. That starts your own journey. And that idea is mirrored at the journey's end. It's mirrored at the end of a great story. And I'll show you why in just a second that works. And I guarantee you probably never heard this from anybody else. And that idea is followed repeatedly along the way. It's like something that nurtures you in a story that you're creating. You know, whenever the energy's lagging, you look to that idea, and it'll buoy you back up. One of my former students has the only animation company in Israel, and I taught him at the university, at Academy of Art College in San Francisco, and I said, well, what did you learn from me? You know, I just taught you English. And he said, well, this singular idea that you had, that if you look at something you want to achieve, like there's a golden temple on top of a mountain, and you want to get to it, but there's a jungle in front of you. So you're hacking through this jungle, trying to find the path, stay on the path, and you think you're never going to make it, then you just look up and the golden temple is still there. So it keeps you there. So goals are important. That's a big part of the Campbell journey. And it's fueled by faith. And what I mean by faith, I mean that it's unflagging. The people that achieve things, particularly in Hollywood, they have faith that they're going to get there, and they don't give up. There's a guy who lives out here in Malibu. I was in a film class with him in Malibu at one time, named Jeremy Joe Kronsberg, and he wrote a movie called Every Which Way But Loose, and 52 producers turned it down before his wife, Barbara, talked to Clint Eastwood's secretary in an airport line waiting to get on a plane, and she got Clint to read it. And it's your story and your careers are strengthened through struggle. And I repeatedly tell my students that if you're struggling and it's hard, oh God, I don't know if I can do this anymore, you know, it's the whole thing of what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, even if sometimes you want it to kill you. And and that idea is really your key to success, because that'll get a movie going. If you walk in with an idea that people just go, yeah. There's a guy last week sold a series to ABC called Voicemail, and he'd saved all his voicemail tapes, and he thought, gee, I'm going to put some pictures to those. And he made some little short films, and he put them all on an iPod, loaded it up on an iPod, marched into ABC and said, here's my series, and they bought it. It's going to be on the web, and it's going to be, you know, a series. So back to my thing I call a shaping force, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. It appears in the middle of Act 1. And where I sort of got a clue about this, I was interviewing Lou Hunter one time, wrote Screenwriting 434, former co-chairman of UCLA Screenwriting Department. And Lou said, you know, by about page 17, you know what's going on or not. And that just always stuck with me. So when I was trying to reformulate this thing to put together my screenwriting class, I went, yeah, that's it. It's in the middle of Act 1. And this has worked out for me. And it's hinted at beforehand. The best example that I use is Castaway, because that movie is about time and what you do with it. And it's, you know, it starts out, and Tom Hanks is a time expert. You know, and he's got to go handle this time thing, but he never has time for the people that matter. So there's a hint. And it springs from the inciting incident, which is like Tom has got to go to Russia to straighten out they're not getting any of the FedEx packages there on time. It reappears repeatedly through the movie, and that sort of forms the spine of the story. And Castaway is so good because it's got that pocket watch, and with Helen Hunt's picture in it. And you keep seeing that through various crucial points of the story. And it's what the story's about. You know, Bill Broyles didn't tell me that it was about time, but he gave a lecture after I wrote this and put it in my course at the University of Texas, and he told one of my students it's about time. But here's the thing about the story structure that I teach. This shaping force thing, it can be a hero, it can be a villain. In Alien, it's a villain. That's what the movie's about. Or a theme, like time in Castaway. So it's a little more flexible. Or it can be anything. It really can. And so I love Campbell. I love all that stuff. But not every movie is a heroic journey. Not every story is. You know, so I think we have to be flexible about these things. Now here's where I start getting into science. Catch a wave, catch the force. Life flows, moves in waves. You can see this on a freeway. You'll see cars that are sort of in a packet. And you move ahead, there's a gap. There's another one. You can see this all around you if you're observant. Great stories flow, and they move in waves. There'll be action, then there'll be something else. Joel Silver believes you should have something blowing up about every 10 minutes, you know, something big happen. And, you know, his movies are pretty successful, you know. Ups and downs are natural, you know. Even though, you know, you want things to always be good, you know, the downs are okay. We learn from the downs. It's a resting point sometimes. And great stories mirror life's natural ride, and that's why we like them. And they enhance its dreams and emotions. And there's a pattern to this flow, which I'm going to get into. And we live these things. Okay, so this is an interesting guy. His name's R.N. Elliott. And the thing that you'll see on the right there is the Elliott Wave. It's ELLIOTT. And there's a website you can look up, elliottwave.com. Curiously enough, in 1974, when I came to Los Angeles, I briefly lived in the house where Elliott was living when he came up with the Elliott Wave. Just one of those little odd life coincidences. There's his name, Ralph Nelson Elliott, and the Elliott Wave. Now, this is how I've adapted Joseph Campbell, Aristotle's 3-act structure in Poetics, Shakespeare's 5 acts, and the Elliott Wave, and my little shaving force all into one thing. There's an inciting incident, and then in the middle of Act 1, which is the top of that thing, there's this shaping force. What's the movie about? And then at the end of Act 1, where you depart the old world for the new, it's kind of a downer. You know, Luke Skywalker doesn't want to leave his little planet, but his aunt and uncle have been killed, and he didn't want, you know, he's the reluctant person. So it's really kind of a downer. And then in the first part of Act 2, it's a constant struggle because he's in a new world. And he's, you know, and in Castaway, it's like the obvious things of trying to learn to survive on this desert island. And then you hit a midpoint, which there's a crisis where the hero has to achieve something, has to take it a little bit over the top, do a little bit more, if they're going to become more causative over this new world than the effect of it. And in Castaway, he has to knock out this abscessed tooth that he has neglected all his time, or it's going to kill him. And what happens? The screen fades to black, and then it comes back up, and Tom Hanks is transformed. He's lost weight, he's thin. The fish that he couldn't spear to save his life, he spears instantly. He goes running across these rocks that were tearing up his feet, isn't bothered. And so he's sort of become a master of this new world that he's in to a degree. So there's more chance that he'll survive and be a hero who will come back with a boon at the end than not. And that usually happens in the second act. And then at the end of the second act, it says dilemma, but that's all I could fit into the little program I was doing with this picture. And I call it the deepest dilemma. It's an, oh shit, how's he going to get out of this? Or, you know, or how's she ever going to get this guy to love her again, sort of thing, right? And so this is the true test of all of this transformation that's taken place. And so there's another example of why it's good to have the downs. It's like, okay, you're so smart, let's see what you can do. And then the hero marshals everything that she's learned to the end, and then boom, it's a big up at the end. And I call this an Elliott Wave-based story structure. It's Ralph Elliott and Elliott McGuckin, I guess. So. Now here's something I've learned recently about science. This is very interesting. Light is a combination of an electrical wave and a magnetic wave. And in terms of story, you might think of the electricity as the intellect and the magnetic wave as the emotion, right? Because you think of big stars and they're magnetic, right? And what do they make their living on besides good looks? It's emotion. And these two things interacting form a beam of light. And in good stories, if you don't have intellect with emotion, you don't really have a good story. You've got to have a balance. And there's a sort of a graphic of a breakdown of the two parts of a beam of light. And here's a book I read recently, which I think is absolutely fantastic. It's called The God Effect. It's about quantum entanglement, which is science's strangest phenomenon. And it talks about time travel, quantum computing, and a whole bunch of other things. Here's a picture of it. And there were these experiments that took place in 1969 about this. And I'll try to be brief about it. These two guys named Shimony and Clauser experimented. They heated calcium to produce a gas. The gas was hit by an ultraviolet beam, and that created light energy absorbed by electrons, and that got a boost of energy Now, most electrons give off a single photon. 1 in a million gives off 2 photons. So remember 1 in a million, because sometimes the odds in Hollywood or even in publishing are about 1 in a million that you're really going to make it big, right? One of those photons is green, one's violet. And these photon pairs are uniquely entangled. That means they communicate with each other. Well, what the hell does that have to do with story? Well, these two things can communicate across the whole universe. And scientists don't really quite know how this works yet, but they do know it works. And there's been experiments where they've been able to make this work under a river through a tunnel in Austria. And we'll see quantum computing fairly soon. And it's based on this principle. Now, what happens is these 2 photons, you got one here and one here. They're on the other side of the universe, and they know what the other is doing. You know, maybe if some of you got a good relationship, you get that going on a little bit, right? Well, that to me sort of aligns with people who make it in Hollywood and people who make it in publishing and creatively and in entrepreneurs. The amount of energy of a photon depends on the frequency. And, you know, I don't have time to explain that a lot. 2 photons together add up to the frequency of an original light, so you don't lose energy. Because there's a unique thing about this 2 photon thing that's given off. Now, when one of these photons is examined, contacted by another force or something, the spin of it decreases, and so it loses energy. So keep that in mind. Here's how it works story-wise. If you doubt the energy, if you doubt the strength of your original idea, it will decrease it. I see people do this in Hollywood. I see people who give up. And what they do is they'll run into opposition. They'll run into people that don't know what the hell they're talking about, which is fairly common in Hollywood. and they will then go into self-doubt. So they've examined this other idea. It's like here they are, and they've got this idea that they're putting out there. So it's like these 2 photons. And a photon's like a mirror of them or something, with their energy. They've got the idea in their mind and the idea they're trying to put in the world. They doubt this idea they try to put in the world. It decreases its value. And so it loses. The people that I know who have succeeded in Hollywood, somehow they never stop with this. They don't doubt it. They might have their downs, but they always come back up. Your original idea is usually the strongest because it generates the story and its details. I interviewed the guy that wrote, for one of my books, the guy that wrote Cocoon. And about 7 screenwriters got a hold of that. And then finally, they hired an 8th screenwriter who came to David Saperstein. And that guy said, David, I read your manuscript. He sold an unpublished manuscript. I think I'm just going to script that. And he said, okay. And so that's what they shot. So all these machinations in Hollywood, and they go back to the original, right? So don't doubt your basic original idea that really was the inciting incident of your story that got you started on trying to create this thing. Because losing your original vision decreases its power. You're handicapping yourself if you doubt it. Just a few more. Now, here's something. This might be a little controversial. There's a thing in the Bible about the Alpha and Omega, and it's the first and last letters of the Greek alphabet, and an account that Jesus said he was the Alpha and the Omega. There he is. And there's the things. Well, one thing about his life that I think we know for certain is that he never doubted his message. His message remained a constant throughout his life. I think that has something to do with what we have 2,000 years later. So, and that life is one of the lives that was, studied by Joseph Campbell. Mencius is the number 3 popularity philosopher of China. It's Lao Tzu, Taoism, and Confucius, and then it's Mencius. I got this quote from a Wall Street Journal article. This is something Mencius said. He said, "Heaven, when it is about to place a great responsibility on a man, always first tests his resolution. It wears out his sinews and bones with toil, exposes his body to starvation, subjects him to extreme poverty, frustrates his efforts so as to stimulate his mind, toughens his nature and makes good his deficiencies. And men, for the most part, can mend their ways only after they make mistakes. Only when they are frustrated in mind and in their deliberations can they stand up anew. Only when their intentions become visible on their countenances and audible in their voices can they be understood by others. So, that's my message is, when you've got this original idea and it's an entrepreneurial idea that might change the world or even just make life better in your community, you're going to run up against opposition. You're going to have ups and you're going to have downs. So just get used to it. When you get that opposition, you get those downs, don't sweat it, because that's just natural. It's the way life flows. But if you maintain your idea and don't doubt it, it really breaks down to the basic science of the universe, and you'll probably get there. So that's what I've got to tell you.